Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. I am Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library, and all that good stuff. And we are reading Captain Blood, almost to the end of Captain Blood. Just the last few chapters left in this adventurous pirate tale. I am loving it. I hope you are too. So in our last chapter, he being Captain Blood and his captains, the other captains of the ships in his fleet, if you will, have signed on with the French, amounts to the French admiral, a man named Monsieur de Rivarol, and he's a baron, La Baron Rivarol, and they were going to sack and loot the wealth of Cartagena, an act of aggression against Spain because France and Spain are at this time currently at war. So Peter Blood, at the urging of his men who are looking to get back into a little bit of pirating after taking some time off, they agreed to go ahead and do this, and Peter Blood sort of says, okay, fine, let's go do this. Let's partner up with this French admiral, join his fleet, and then attack Cartagena. And so, because he's always been about attacking French ships and settlements and all that good stuff in himself, feeling that Spain, I'm sorry, not French settlements, Spanish settlements, that he felt that's wronged by Spain, and so of course there is conflict between the admiral and Captain Blood. Captain Blood feels he knows better. He has done research on this for a time that he was going to attack the city himself, and he decided not to. But now they have more ships and more men, and rather than let it go, they want to help, and of course they have been promised 5% of the loot that is taken. So they do this. Monsieur de Rivarol has a plan in mind, which Peter Blood immediately dislikes, and he gives him reasons why, and explains that there's a reason why the forts are positioned where they are, because that's the only way to get in, even though it appears that you can get in another way. There's actually only one way to get in, and that's the part that is heavily fortified. So the first thing, of course, Monsieur de Rivarol wants to do is the ships that are going to attack the fortress are going to be the ones that belong to the Buccaneers, and let them take all the damage, basically. And then once they're all beaten up, then the French Navy will just come in and take over. And of course, he has no interest in doing that. He says, "Thank you, I will not do that." And then, after Monsieur de Rivarol's first attempt fails horribly, at night, in the early morning, Monsieur de Rivarol wakes up and finds, to the sound of gunfire, cannon fire, and they realize that the pirates have started without them. The pirates, on their own, the 4 ships, led by Captain Blood, have attacked the fortress themselves. They have done a lot of damage, eventually using their sailorly skills to basically what they call reduce the fortress in this case. So basically knock it down to the point where it is no longer functioning. And then Captain Blood goes back to Monsieur de Rivarol, who's still in his jammies, as they mention in here. Not jammies, but he's in a nightshirt and a cap and all that. And he says, "Well, now that I've done the hard work for you, all you have to do is go in. There's a smaller fort just inside, but they're not as much trouble as this big one that I've already taken out for you, so you can handle that, and then we'll go about and loot the city. And they do. And in fact, it is a successful venture from that point on. And one of the last lines in the last chapter was, in the course of 4 days, over 100 mules laden with gold went out of the city and down to the boats waiting at the beach to convey the treasure aboard the ships. So, with that in mind, let's start off with chapter 28, which is entitled The Honor of Monsieur de Rivarol. During the capitulation, and for some time after, Captain Blood and the greater portion of his buccaneers had been at their post on the heights of the Nuestra Senora de la Popa, utterly in ignorance of what was taking place. Blood, although the man chiefly, if not solely, responsible for the swift reduction of the city, which was proving a veritable treasure house, was not even shown the consideration of being called to the council of officers which with Monsieur de Rivarol determined the terms of capitulation. This was a slight that, at another time, Captain Blood would not have borne for a moment, but at present, in his odd frame of mind and its divorcement from piracy, he was content to smile at his utter contempt of the French general. Not so, however, his captains, and still less his men. The resentment smoldered amongst them for a while, to flame out violently at the end of that week in Cartagena. It was only by undertaking to voice their grievance to the Baron that their captain was able for the moment to pacify them. That done, he went at once in quest of Monsieur de Rivarol. He found him in the offices which the Baron had set up in the town, with a staff of clerks to register the treasure brought in and to cast up the surrendered account books, with a view to ascertaining precisely what were the sums yet to be delivered up. The Baron sat there scrutinizing ledgers like a city merchant, and checking figures to make sure that all was correct to the last peso. A choice occupation this for the general of the king's armies by sea and land. He looked up, irritated by the interruption which Captain Blood's advent occasioned. Monsieur le Baron, the latter greeted him, I must speak frankly, you must suffer it. My men are on the point of mutiny. Monsieur de Rivarol considered him with a faint lift of the eyebrows. Captain Blood, I, too, will speak frankly, and you, too, must suffer it. If there is a mutiny, you and your captain shall be held personally responsible. The mistake you make is in assuming with me the tone of an ally, whereas I have given you clearly to understand from the first that you are simply in the position of having accepted service under me. Your proper apprehension of that fact will save the waste of a deal of words. Blood contained himself with difficulty. One of these fine days, he felt, that for the sake of humanity he must slit the comb of this supercilious, arrogant cockerel. You may define our positions as you please, said he, but I'll remind you that the nature of a thing is not changed by the name you give it. I am concerned with facts, chiefly with the fact that we entered into a definite articles with you. Those articles provide for a certain distribution of the spoil. My men demand it. They are not satisfied. Of what are they not satisfied? Demanded the Baron. Of your honesty, Monsieur de Rivarol. A blow in the face could scarcely have taken the Frenchman more aback. He stiffened and drew himself up, his eyes blazing, his face of a deathly pallor. The clerks at the tables laid down their pens and awaited the explosion in a sort of terror. For a long moment there was silence. Then the great gentleman delivered himself in a voice of concentrated anger. "Do you really dare so much, you and the dirty thieves that follow you? God's blood! You shall answer to me for that word, though it entail a yet worse dishonor to meet you. Ha! I will remind you, said Blood, that I'm speaking not for myself, but for my men. It is they who are not satisfied, they who threaten that unless satisfaction is afforded them, and promptly, they will take it." "Take it?" said Rivarol, trembling in his rage. "Let them attempt it, and now don't be rash. My men are within their rights, as you are aware. They demand to know when the sharing of the spoil is to take place, and when they are to receive the fifth for which their articles provide." "God give me patience! How can we share the spoil before it has been completely gathered?" "My men have reason to believe that it is gathered, and, anyway, they view with mistrust that it should be all housed aboard your ships, and remain in your possession. They say that hereafter there will be no ascertaining what the spoil really amounts to." "But, name of heaven, I have kept books. They are there for all to see." "They do not wish to see account books. Few of them can read. They want to view the treasure itself. They know, you compel me to be blunt, that the accounts have been falsified. Your books show the spoil of Cartagena to amount to some 10 million livres. The men know, and they are very skilled in these computations, that it exceeds the enormous total of 40 millions. They insist that the treasure itself be produced and weighed in their presence, as is the custom among the brethren of the coast." "I know nothing of filibuster customs." The gentleman was disdainful. "But you are learning quickly." "What do you mean, you rogue? I'm a leader of armies, not of plundering thieves." "Oh, but of course." Blood's irony laughed in his eyes. "Yet, whatever you may be, I warn you that unless you yield to the demand that I consider just and therefore uphold, you may look for trouble, and it would not surprise me if you never leave Cartagena at all, nor convey a single gold piece home to France." "Ah, pardieu! Am I to understand that you are threatening me?" Come, Monsieur le Baron, I warn you of the trouble that a little prudence may avert. You do not know on what a volcano you are sitting. You do not know the ways of buccaneers. If you persist, Cartagena will be drenched in blood, and whatever the outcome, the King of France will not have been well served." That shifted the basis of the argument to less hostile ground. A while yet it continued, to be concluded at last by an ungracious undertaking from Monsieur de Rivarol to submit to the demands of the buccaneers. He gave it with an extreme ill grace, and only because Blood made him realize at last that to withhold it longer would be dangerous. In an engagement, he might conceivably defeat Blood's followers. But conceivably, he might not. And even if he succeeded, the effort would be so costly to him in men that he might not thereafter find himself in sufficient strength to maintain his hold of what he had seized. The end of it all was that he gave a promise at once to make the necessary preparations, and if Captain Blood and his officers would wait upon him on board the Victorieuse, tomorrow morning the treasure should be produced, weighed in their presence, and their fifth share surrendered there and then into their own keeping. Among the buccaneers that night there was hilarity over the sudden abatement of Monsieur de Rivarol's monstrous pride. But when the next dawn broke over Cartagena, they had the explanation of it. The only ships to be seen in the harbor were the Arabella and the Elizabeth riding at anchor, and the Atropos and the Lachesis careened on the beach for repair of the damage sustained in the bombardment. The French ships were gone. They had been quietly and secretly warped out of harbor under cover of night, and 3 sails, faint and small, on the horizon to westward, was all that remained to be seen of them. The absconding Monsieur de Rivarol had gone off with the treasure, taking with him the troops and mariners he had brought from France. He had left behind him at Cartagena not only the empty-handed buccaneers, whom he had swindled, but also Monsieur de Cussy and the volunteers and negroes from Hispaniola, whom he had swindled no less. The 2 parties were fused into one by their common fury, and before the exhibition of it, the inhabitants of that ill-fated town were stricken with deeper terror than they had yet known since the coming of this expedition. Captain Blood alone kept his head, setting a curb upon his deep chagrin. He had promised himself that before parting from Monsieur de Rivarol he would present a reckoning for all the petty affronts and insults to which that unspeakable fellow, now proved a scoundrel, had subjected him. "We must follow," he declared, "follow and punish." At first that was the general cry. Then came the consideration that only 2 of the buccaneers' ships were seaworthy, and these could not accommodate the whole force, particularly being at that moment indifferently victualled for a long voyage. The crews of the Lachesis and the Atropos, and with them their captains, Wolverstone and Iberville, renounced the intention. After all, there would be a deal of treasure still hidden in Cartagena. They would remain behind to extort it whilst fitting their ships for sea. Let Blood and Hagthorpe and those who sailed with them do as they pleased. Then only did Blood realize the rashness of his proposal, and in attempting to draw back, he almost precipitated a battle between the 2 parties into which that same proposal had now divided the buccaneers. And meanwhile those French sails on the horizon were growing less and less. Blood was reduced to despair. If he went off now, heaven knew what would happen to the town, the temper of those whom he was leaving being what it was. Yet if he remained, it would simply mean that his own and Hagthorpe's crews would join in the Saturnalia and increase the hideousness of events now inevitable. Unable to reach a decision, his own men and Hagthorpe's took the matter off his hands, eager to give chase to Rivarol. Not only was a dastardly cheat to be punished, but an enormous treasure was to be won by treating as an enemy this French commander, who himself had so villainously broken the alliance. When Blood, torn as he was between the conflicting considerations, still hesitated, they bore him almost by main force aboard the Arabella. Within an hour the water casks, at least replenished, stowed aboard, the Arabella and the Elizabeth put to sea upon that angry chase. When we were well at sea, and the Arabella's course was laid, writes Pitt in his log, I went to seek the captain, knowing him to be in great trouble of mind over these events. I found him sitting alone in his cabin, his head in his hands, torment in the eyes, that stared straight before him, seeing nothing. "What now, Peter?" cried the young Somerset mariner. "Lord, man, what is there here to fret you? Surely 'tisn't the thought of Rivarol?" "No," said Blood thickly, and for once he was communicative. "It may well be that he must vent the thing that oppressed him, or be driven mad by it. And Pitt, after all, was his friend and loved him, and so a proper man for confidences. But if she knew, oh God, I had thought to have done with piracy, thought to have done with it forever, yet here have I been committed by this scoundrel to the worst piracy that ever I was guilty of. Think of Cartagena, think of the hell those devils will be making of it now, and I must have that on my soul." "Nay, Peter, 'tisn't on your soul, but on Rivarol's. It is that dirty thief who has brought all this about. What could you have done to prevent it?" "I would have stayed if it could have availed." "It could not, and you know it. So why repine?" "There is more than that to it," groaned Blood. "What now? What remains? Loyal service with the English was made impossible for me. Loyal service with France has led to this, and that is equally impossible hereafter. What remains, then? Piracy? I have done with it. Egad, if I am to live clean, I believe the only thing is to go and offer my sword to the King of Spain." But something remained. The last thing that he could have expected, something towards which they were rapidly sailing over the tropical sunlit sea. All this against which he now inveighed so bitterly was but a necessary stage in the shaping of his odd destiny. Setting a course for Hispaniola, since they judged that thither must Rivarol go to refit before attempting to cross to France, the Arabella and the Elizabeth ploughed briskly northward with a moderately favorable wind for 2 days and nights without ever catching a glimpse of their quarry. The third dawn brought with it a haze which circumscribed their range of vision to something between 2 and 3 miles, and deepened their growing vexation and their apprehension that Monsieur de Rivarol might escape them altogether. Their position then, according to Pitt's log, was approximately 75 degrees 30 minutes west longitude by 17 degrees 45 minutes north latitude, so that they had Jamaica on their larboard beam some 30 miles to westward, and, indeed, away to northwest, faintly visible as a bank of clouds, appeared the great ridge of the Blue Mountains, whose peaks were thrust into the clear upper air above the low-lying haze. The wind, to which they were sailing very close, was westerly, and it bore to their ears a booming sound which, in less experienced ears, might have passed for the breaking of surf upon a lee shore. "Guns," said Pitt, who stood with Blood upon the quarter-deck. Blood nodded, listening. 10 miles away, perhaps 15, somewhere off Port Royal, I should judge," Pitt added. Then he looked at his captain. "Does it concern us?" he asked. "Guns off Port Royal? That should argue Colonel Bishop at work. And against whom should he be in action but against friends of ours? I think it may concern us anyway. We'll stand in to investigate. Bid them put the helm over." Close-hauled and tacked aweather, guided by the sound of combat, which grew in volume and definition as they approached it. Thus, for an hour, perhaps, then, as telescope to his eye, Blood raked the haze, expecting at any moment to behold the battling ships, the guns abruptly ceased. They held to their course, nevertheless, with all hands on deck, eagerly, anxiously scanning the sea ahead, and presently an object loomed into view, which soon defined itself for a great ship on fire. As the Arabella, with the Elizabeth following closely, raced nearer to their northwesterly tack, the outlines of the blazing vessel grew clearer. Presently her masts stood out sharp and black above the smoke and flames, and through his telescope Blood made out plainly the pennon of St. George fluttering from her maintop. "An English ship!" he cried. He scanned the seas for the conqueror in the battle, which this grim evidence was added to that of the sounds they had heard, and when at last, as they drew closer to the doomed vessel, they made out the shadowy outlines of 3 tall ships, some 3 or 4 miles away, standing in toward Port Royal, the first and natural assumption was that these ships must belong to the Jamaica fleet, and that the burning vessel was a defeated buccaneer. And because of this, they sped on to pick up the 3 boats that were standing away from the blazing hulk. But Pitt, who through the telescope was examining the receding squadron, observed things apparently only to the eye of the trained mariner, and made the incredible announcement that the largest of these 3 vessels was Rivarol's Victorieuse. They took in sail and hove to as they came up with the drifting boats, laden to capacity with survivors. And there were others adrift on some of the spars and wreckage with which the sea was strewn, who must be rescued. Chapter 29, entitled The Service of King William. One of the boats bumped alongside the Arabella, and up the entrance ladder came first a slight, spruce little gentleman in a coat of mulberry satin laced with gold, whose wizened, yellow, rather peevish face was framed in a heavy black periwig. His modish and costly apparel had nowise suffered by the adventure through which he had passed, and he carried himself with the easy assurance of a man of rank. Here, quite clearly, was no buccaneer. He was closely followed by one who, in every particular, save that of age, was his physical opposite, corpulent in a brawny, vigorous way, with a full, round, weather-beaten face, whose mouth was humorous, and whose eyes were blue and twinkling. He was well dressed, without fripperies, and bore with him an air of vigorous authority. As the little man stepped from the ladder into the waist, whither Captain Blood had gone to receive him, his sharp, ferrety, dark eyes swept the uncouth ranks of the assembled crew of the Arabella. "And where the devil may I be now?" he demanded irritably. "Are you English, or what the devil are you?" "Myself, I have the honor to be Irish, sir. My name is Blood, Captain Peter Blood, and this is my ship, the Arabella. All very much at your service." "Blood?" shrilled the little man. "Odds blood, a pirate!" He swung to the Colossus who followed him. "A damned pirate, Vanderkuylen! Rend my vitals, but we've come from Scylla to Charybdis." "So?" said the other, gutturally, and again, "So?" Then the humor of it took him, and he yielded to it. "Damn, what's to laugh at, you porpoise?" spluttered Mulberry Coat. "A fine tale this'll make it home. Admiral Vanderkuylen, first loses his fleet in the night, and then has his flagship fired under him by a French squadron, and ends all by being captured by a pirate. I'm glad you find it a matter for laughter, since for my sins I happen to be with you. I'm damned if I do. There's a misapprehension, if I may make so bold as to point out, put in Blood quietly. You are not captured, gentlemen, you are rescued. When you realize it, perhaps it will occur to you to acknowledge the hospitality I'm offering you. It may be poor, but it is the best at my disposal. The fierce little gentleman stared at him. Damn! Do you permit yourself to be ironical? He disapproved him, and possibly with a view to correcting any such tendency, proceeded to introduce himself. I am Lord Willoughby, King William's Governor-General of the West Indies, and this is Admiral Vanderkuylen, commander of His Majesty's West Indian fleet, at present mislaid somewhere in this damned Caribbean Sea. King William, quoth Blood, and he was conscious that Pitt and Dyke, who were behind him, now came edging nearer, sharing his own wonder. And who may be King William? And of what may he be king? What's that? In a wonder greater than his own, Lord Willoughby stared back at him. At last, I am alluding to His Majesty King William III, William of Orange, who, with Queen Mary, has been ruling England for 2 months and more. There was a moment's silence, until Blood realized what he was being told. Do you mean, sir, that they've roused themselves at home and kicked out that scoundrel James and his gang of ruffians? Admiral Vanderkuylen nudged his lordship, a humorous twinkle in his blue eyes. His politics of very sound, I think, he growled. His lordship's smile brought lines like gashes into the leathery cheeks. Schleif, hadn't you heard? Where the devil have you been at all? Out of touch with the world for the last 3 months, said Blood. Stab me, you must have been, and in that 3 months the world has undergone some changes. Briefly he added an account of them. King James was fled to France, and living under the protection of King Louis. Wherefore, and for other reasons, England had joined the league against her, and was now at war with France. That was how it happened that the Dutch admiral's flagship had been attacked by Monsieur de Rivarol's fleet that morning, from which it clearly followed that in its voyage from Cartagena the Frenchman must have spoken to some ship that gave him the news. After that, with renewed assurances that aboard his ship they should be honorably entreated, Captain Blood led the Governor-General and the Admiral to his cabin. What time the work of rescue went on. The news he had received had set Blood's mind in turmoil. If King James was dethroned and banished, there was an end to his own outlawry for his alleged share in an earlier attempt to drive out that tyrant. It became possible for him to return home and take up his life again at the point where it was so unfortunately interrupted 4 years ago. He was dazzled by the prospect so abruptly opened out to him. The thing so filled his mind, moved him so deeply, that he must afford it its expression. In doing so, he revealed to himself more than he knew or intended to the astute little gentleman who watched him so keenly the while. Go home, if you will, said the lordship, when Blood paused. You may be sure that none will harass you on the score of your piracy, considering what it was that drove you to it. But why be in haste? We have heard you, to be sure. and we know of what you are capable upon the seas. Here is a great chance for you. Since you declare yourself sick of piracy, should you choose to serve King William out here during this war, your knowledge of the West Indies should render you a very valuable servant to His Majesty's government, which you would not find ungrateful. You should consider it. Damn, sir, I repeat, it is a great chance you are given. That your lordship gives me, Blood amended. I'm very grateful, but at the moment I confess I can consider nothing but this great news. It alters the shape of the world. I must accustom myself to view it as it now is, before I can determine my own place in it. Pitt came in to report that the work of rescue was at an end, that the men picked up some 45 in all, safe aboard the 2 buccaneer ships. He asked for orders. Blood rose. I am negligent of your lordship's concern in my consideration of my own. You'll be wishing me to land you at Port Royal. At Port Royal? The little man squirmed wrathfully on his seat. Wrathfully, and at length he informed Blood that they had put into Port Royal last evening to find its deputy governor absent. He has gone on some wild goose chase to Tortuga after buccaneers, taking the whole fleet with him. Blood stared in surprise a moment, then yielded to laughter. He went, I suppose, before news reached him of the change of government at home and the war with France. He did not, snapped Willoughby. He was informed of both, and also of my coming before he set out. Oh, impossible. So I should have thought, but I have the information from Major Mallard, whom I found in Port Royal, apparently governing in this fool's absence. But is he mad to leave his post at such a time? Blood was amazed. Taking the whole fleet with him, pray remember, leaving the place open to French attack. That is the sort of deputy governor that the late government thought fit to appoint, an epitome of its misrule. Damn. He leaves Port Royal unguarded, save by a ramshackle fort that can be reduced to rubble in an hour. Stab me. It's unbelievable. The lingering smile faded from Blood's face. Is Rivarol aware of this? He cried sharply. It was the Dutch admiral who answered him. Would he go there if he were not? Monsieur de Rivarol, he takes some of our men prisoners. Perhaps they tell him. Perhaps they make them tell. It is great opportunity. His lordship snarled like a mountain cat. That rascal bishop shall answer for it with his head if there is any mischief done through this desertion of his post. What if it were deliberate, eh? What if he were more knave than fool? What if this is his way of serving King James, from whom he held his office? Captain Blood was generous. Hardly so much. It was just vindictiveness that urged him. It's myself he's hunting at Tortuga, my lord, but I'm thinking that while he's about it, I'd best be looking after Jamaica for King William. He laughed, with more mirth than he had used in the last 2 months. Set a course for Port Royal, Jeremy, and make all speed. We'll be level yet with Monsieur de Rivarol and wipe off some other scores at the same time. Both Lord Willoughby and the Admiral were on their feet. But you are not equal to it, damn! Cried his lordship. Any one of the Frenchman's 3 ships is a match for both of yours, my man. In guns, aye, said Blood, and he smiled. But there's more than guns that matter in these affairs. If your lordship would like to see an action fought at sea as an action should be fought, this is your opportunity." Both stared at him. "But the odds," his lordship insisted. "It is impossible," said Van der Kuylen, shaking his great head. "Seamanship is important, but guns is guns. If I can't defeat him, I can sink my own ships in the channel and block him in until Bishop gets back from his wild goose chase with his squadron, or until your own fleet turns up." "And what good will that be, pray?" demanded Willoughby. "I'll be after telling you. Rivarol is a fool to take this chance, considering what he's got aboard. He carried in his hold the treasure plundered from Cartagena, amounting to 40 million livres." They jumped at the mention of that colossal sum. "He has gone into Port Royal with it. Whether he defeats me or not, he doesn't come out of Port Royal with it again, and sooner or later that treasure shall find its way into King William's coffers. After, say, 1/5 share shall have been paid to my buccaneers. Is that agreed, Lord Willoughby?" His lordship stood up and, shaking back the cloud of lace from his wrist, held out a delicate white hand. "Captain Blood, I discover greatness in you," said he. "Sure, it's your lordship that's had a fine sight to perceive it," laughed the captain. Yes, but how will you do it?" growled Van der Kuylen. "Come on deck, and it's a demonstration I'll be giving you before the day's much older." And that, my friends, is the conclusion of chapter 29. Boom. So that means that we only have 2 chapters left. They're short chapters, so we'll read them both on Monday. That also means that on Monday we will be deciding what our next title to read will be. And so, as I said the last time, your homework is to go to that the Facebook page, the Adventure and Mystery Book Club Facebook page, and read through some of the titles that are currently available. They're public domain. They're available on Project Gutenberg, and find one that you like or come up with one of your own. We've already had one nomination for a very good title, so maybe you could add yours to it, or you can vote for the ones that are already nominated, and then whoever gets the most number of votes on Monday will be the one that we read going forward. So that's your job. Go this weekend to the web page. It'll only take you a second. Find a title or nominate a title, and put it in the comments underneath the Facebook post, listing all the different titles, and then we'll see. We'll see what happens on Monday. We'll read our last 2 chapters. Story will be finished, and we will determine what our next story will be. Can't wait. Love to see what you guys choose every single time. Certainly chose a good one in Captain Blood this time, and certainly had a lot of fun with that. And then on Monday, we'll finish it up. Have a good weekend, everybody. We'll see you again on Monday. Take care.